I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix.
I'm not alone in thinking everyone is on edge nowadays. Anxious, nervous, teetering on the edge of a breakdown. In today's modern techno-capitalist system, there is a sense that there is no viable alternative available. And this trapping has evoked a mass diagnosis of mental illness. Putting aside a larger and probably entirely separate video of the overdiagnosis and medication of society, there is a sense that something inherent within our curated environment is deeply troubling, unnerving, relentless, and evokes a subtle sense of foreboding and doom. We have choice in our bagels, in our fashion, in our slop, but not in our system. It is a totalitarian, oligarchical system, in the guise of a free democracy, accelerating the decay of the human spirit. So I posit and illuminate in this video how the system itself is making us mentally ill. What is the system? For all intents and purposes, and to be as precise as possible, the system I am referring to is the current model of technocratic capitalism in the post-industrial age, sometimes referred to as techno-feudalism. It's pervasive in pretty much all corners of the world, and the data sets are in. Our minds have been fucked. Brains that are hardwired for life in the African savannah are now being bombarded by lights, alerts, pings, beeps, rings, news flashes, and notifications, all of which bring urgency. All bombard our limited attention, so that we neglect the valuable in lieu of the superficial. For a few decades now, we have seen a steady rise in depression and anxiety that disproportionately affects the West rather than the global South. Though with the embracement of the same system in the exploited global South, there's a correlated rise there too. The commodification of everything and in turn the devaluing of everything, including ourselves and what Marx lamented as the alienation from our labour, has separated us from the world at large. We live in what Baudrillard defines as hyperreality. That is a world in and of itself separate from the world, a simulation of reality, a feeling we're not living enough, not meeting the demands of reality, in spite of the comforts we now all enjoy. Those familiar with Aldous Huxley's Brave New World will recognise this modern day parable we find ourselves in. And what has made this modern world? Well, a useful overview, big picture of the world we've created, or rather the world that has emerged from the primordial goo long ago, is best described by Ian McIlwraith, author of The Master and His Emissary.
What does it do? The left hemisphere does this, the right hemisphere does that. But instead we should have asked the question we'd ask of a person, because after all these hemispheres, the brain, are very strongly part of who we are, and change when we change, and we change when it changes. So the question is how? And the two hemispheres just attend to the world quite differently. What is that difference? It's the difference between a particularizing, detailed attention on a minute element out there that we know what it is already and we want to get it. So it's in the service of grabbing stuff. And so important is that all the animals we've looked at have this strange arrangement that their brains, however primitive, are divided, asymmetrical, and that one of the hemispheres is interested in grabbing and getting. And this has generally been the left, and it certainly is in human beings. So the left hemisphere pays attention to a tiny part of the environment, something that it wants to pick up and eat, something it wants to pick up to build a nest, something it wants to manipulate. So it's there to manipulate and exploit the world. But if that's the only kind of attention it can pay, it won't last, because while it's getting its lunch, it'll become somebody else's. So there has to be another part, another center, another locus of consciousness that is capable of seeing quite differently, attending to the world differently. And I didn't realize to begin with how important this question of attention was, but it dawned on me pretty fast that this was fundamental, because how we attend to the world changes what we see there. And so in the left hemisphere, the world seems to be made up of bits, circumscribed little tiny bits that's highly resolved in detail, not moving, not connected to anything else, decontextualized, abstracted, disembodied, and utterly explicit. So it is what it is, and it is what it says on the label. Whereas in the right hemisphere, it sees the whole complexity of the lived world, that nothing is ever finally certain, ever finally fixed, but always in motion, that everything is ultimately interconnected, that its meaning comes from the context, the other things that it's connected to, that it is a fully embodied world, not just an abstract one made up of concepts, and that its world is alive. And very importantly, it has meaning from the things that lose their meaning when they're made explicit. And these are just about everything that matters to us. Among them is love, sex, poetry, music, architecture, art, religion, ritual, narrative, myth, faith, all these things that give meaning to our lives become diminished when we stand back and pay a kind of super detached attention to them, the kind that the left hemisphere pays when it's standing back and thinking, I'm going to kill that, I'm going to kill that, I need just to hold still while I get it. So that's effectively it. And so there are these two versions of the world that we each of us have in our brains. Well, I say that in our brains, but they're produced by our brains. And they have different qualities. These two things work together in a fruitful relationship in which the right hemisphere oversees the whole and the left hemisphere does a lot of the donkey work. But as things progress, the left hemisphere seems to be emboldened by the idea of control. And civilizations get bigger, they have to control bigger land masses, they have greater wealth, and it becomes effectively a bureaucratic machine that grows up. And like a machine, it hasn't the subtlety that humans have about context and place and time and all the things that rules and procedures leave out because they're non-explicit. All that gets lost, and the civilization coarsens, becomes crude, power-obsessed, and loses its insight into art and religion and the big questions.
As the quote attributed to Aristotle goes, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The modern world has forced us to remain entangled in the weeds of the world. We see only the trees and not the forest. The divine emergence of raw life from the mechanisms that make up the world have been lost on us. And in turn, our overemphasis on the mechanisms of the societal machine rather than the big picture, the humanity, the divine, the sublime, and the beauty of life have rendered us as mechanical robots. That hollowing feeling of modern reality is in some ways a denial of the profound in favor of the quantifiable profane. Another question presents itself. As conscious creatures, have we created this world of comfort and convenience to alleviate our suffering, innate with being conscious animals? Does this comfortable world help widen the gap between the incessant demands of our consciousness and the inability to handle that, thus soothing us by a slow, consistent numbing of our senses? As philosophical pessimist Peter Zapp states, most people learn to save themselves by artificially limiting the content of their consciousness. And has this in turn destroyed our minds in the process? Our environments have been morphed to resemble, in some ways, a Huxleyan dystopia. Sterile, sanitized, driven by the pleasure principle. Conditioned to docility through porn, junk food, consumerism, and manufactured culture. We have been inundated with an excess of choice. That is a system where options are tantamount over quality. As psychologist Barry Schwartz states in The Paradox of Choice, increased freedom does not diminish regret, rather it often magnifies it, precisely because we become more acutely aware of the paths we did not take. Even when we make conscious, ethical, well-considered decisions, regret inevitably finds its way in, not due to failure but because choosing inherently involves loss. Every path taken leaves behind untaken lives, and these untaken lives remain with us, haunting us, not because we erred, but because we had to choose. We have conflated our options, in essence, our prison, with our freedom. With freedom of choice, we've mistaken it for actual, real freedom. As the father of existentialism, Jean-Paul Sartre, laments, man is condemned to be free. As it dawns on us when facing the futility of the world around us, an abundance of choice is not freedom, it is an illusion. This is one of the annals of our suffering. We feel free, but it's painstakingly obvious we aren't. Forget not that all of this malaise is within the elusive parameters of mass surveillance, a self-contained panopticon, where we are surveilled by the state and, thanks to social media, by each other as well. The environment we've created is no better at alleviating us from the stark revelation. The only way out of this panopticon of a schizo circus is, as Camus lamented in The Fall, through the accumulation of wealth, you see, as wealth leads us to have reprieve. reprieved from the masses, reprieved from the circus, reprieved from the rat race. In other words, we are forced to commit to the game that capitalist and financial elites have set the rules to in order for us to live freely. The only way out, it seems, is to play the game, become the whip hand, the 0.1%, and transcend out. Only when we reach the upper echelons of the elite class can we drop out and be free, the carrot on the stick. Not only that, but the sterile world that has been shaped around us changes on a whim. Pandemics, mass lockdowns, extreme weather events, proxy wars and terrorism are all churned out on a 24-hour news cycle that relentlessly reminds you how little control you have. Take away the community aspect, the third place that died long ago, and what sets in is a deeper sense of atomization. To get away from it all, to retire into the hills, hermit it out, Kaczynski style, in some respects has become a perverse end goal for many in the West. So whilst this video no doubt will likely add to the pervasive sense of doom, I want to analyze it, in probably my most theory-heavy video yet. I'll be looking at some concepts by some prominent cultural theorists that articulate our silent struggle beautifully. I want to address the core question: is this system fixable or beyond repair? Are our minds doomed to be fucked as long as this system homogenizes the planet?
The kind of parasites of institutions are real parasites, not immigrants, not people claiming unemployment benefit. The real parasites of our society, the very high earners who propagate all this stuff to keep us in a state of panicked anxiety, and radical competitive individualism, such that we can't act together and gain a collective agency.
The first concept I would like to look at, one that kind of underpins the pervasive collective feeling we share, is by none other than the late, great Mark Fisher. Mark Fisher wrote extensively on the causation between late-stage capitalism, or as he referred to it as capitalist realism, and mental illness. But one idea that succinctly articulates it perfectly is the idea that we are all living in what he defines as a business ontology. Business ontology is the notion that the purpose and meaning of everything be understood within the rubric of a business framework. That viewpoint, internalized by us all, marks us all by our view of our own efficiencies. We have to judge ourselves by how well we perform in a monetary way. Our intersubjective view of usefulness and therefore justification of existing in the world is quantified, monetized to some respect. We, within the ontological view of capitalist realism, are defined as single economic units and nothing else. Obviously, the internalization of this notion and framing self-perception within business ontology is detrimental, as our shared collective human experience cannot often be quantified into digits. The abstractions of our memory and experiences are therefore rendered obsolete in this business ontological viewpoint of the world. In essence, if we haven't produced a monetary tangibility out of our existence, we are, in this day and age, utterly useless. The unemployed, the dropouts, the people who are motivated by dreams rather than finances are excluded from this new world. Moreover, our feeling of needing to consume and produce or face the prospect of being deemed useless in this modern world evokes a sense of dejection in those of us that prefer the world to be more of a playground for our souls and not just a conveyor belt of mindless consumerism. Which brings me on to my next point that Fisher raises, the contemporary reframing of depression, in what Fisher defines as depressive hedonia. Depressive hedonia is, in short, a feeling of depression whereby one feels an inability to do anything except pursue pleasure. Even if one feels depressed, vacuous and unfulfilled, it is often induced by the socio-political climate. The omnipresent and deterministic nature of capitalism, with no viable alternative, dulls our aspirations, pins us into small corners of society and the internet, where we're left to fester, sucking up dopamine wherever we can get it in lieu of any meaningful action. We know deep down that there is something more to life than consumption and pleasure. Yet, many people only ever feel the elevated realm of experience through drugs, sex, or consumption. But we know this is deeply troubling. The means of our happiness shouldn't be contingent on purchases, ingestion, or consumerism. We resign ourselves into what Fisher describes as fatalism, where the future without capitalism is unimaginable, inconceivable. Anchored to the way we feel happiness through mindless pleasure, we cannot imagine an alternative. The future, in some respects, is dead to us. Capitalism and the mindless pleasure it entails prevails. There is no alternative. And what's more is that in what Adam Curtis describes as the empire of the self, we are all aware that everyone else feels the same, which perpetuates this dull, fatalistic, depressive hedonism we find ourselves cycling through day in and day out. We all collectively feel the exact same, sympathize with one another, and yet are unable to enact change or connect. We are collectively in a state of atomized solipsism. But this world, aside from its incessant demands on the psyche, also induces a different malignant form of discombobulating of the human spirit. That is, who can we blame for all this? Capitalism fundamentally operates on a decentralized system, with no key authority figure dictating the demands of the system. What Fisher deems the centerlessness of the modern-day capitalist landscape. Thus, the oppression of the capitalist system is impersonal and what Fisher describes as a mutating bureaucratic machine. This faceless system confirms that we cannot firmly oppose the amorphous phenomena. Fisher goes on to illustrate this opaque, Kafkaesque system in what he calls the microcosm of centerlessness of capitalism, the modern-day call center, whereby Fisher describes systematically the following process. When a worker or customer tries to resolve a problem, they encounter endless layers of protocols, departments, and scripts. Each agent or manager deflects responsibility. The "I'm not authorized to do that," or "you'll need to speak to," etc., etc. For Fisher, the call center epitomizes how capitalism sustains itself through dispersed accountability, depersonalized labor, and the illusion of structure without a center. No one within the system feels in charge, even though everyone contributes to maintaining it. As Fisher describes the ordeal as everywhere the decision is deferred, displaced, responsibilities dissolve in the endless referral between offices, protocols, and outsourced agencies. Compound this with the malignant effects of the attention economy that saps our drive, energy, and will through incessant dopamine spurts, rendering us immune to recollecting or even motivating ourselves to change. We are thus thrust into a collective sense of inertia, induced by an intersubjective cultural amnesia. A cultural amnesia interwoven with depressive hedonia, entangled in a business ontologically coded society. And all of this without a center. And this visceral feeling of fatalistic apathy only serves to drive revenue for techno-feudalist conglomerates that enable it to continue on, harder and more unabating than before. More ads, more social media, more consumerism. The monetary motive is entrenched in the design of the system. The pervasiveness of the socio-economic system and the ability to perceive any alternative to capitalism, a system almost perceived as eternal and forever, burrows deeper into our jaded emotional psyche and fuels the oppression we all are to feel. But there's more to add to it all. The demonic face of modern-day surveillance capitalism. Our self-constructed panopticon. The imprisoning algorithms, the constant watching of everything we do, the relinquishment of privacy. All of these facts of the system are internalized and add more and more to the collective depersonalization of us all, a system by design to crush the individual spirit in celebration of the individual. And without a center to oppose, a face to confront, we are left with the next common symptom of late-stage capitalism, what Fisher describes as reflexive impotence. I actually did a whole video on this, so you can watch it for a deeper understanding of it. But essentially, reflexive impotence is, as Fisher defines, neither a cynicism or a sense of apathy. It is instead an awareness, a collective awareness of that everything is bad. They know it's bad, but they can't do anything about it. This knowledge of ineffectiveness, Fisher suggests, instead becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If one does not believe change can happen, one will not instigate a change of affairs, and therefore nothing will change. Furthermore, the way the techno-system is heavily surveilled on the internet, any chance of organizing is a distant dream, as all modes of communications and channels are surveilled. and thus we're left in a dismal cycle, and one that is endemic and symptomatic of late-stage capitalism, and the show must go on. But hey, capitalism isn't that bad, right? Well, this brings me on to my next point, posited by the great Byung in his seminal book, Burnout Society, in what he defines as toxic positivity within the achievement society. But before we dig into Buell's idea of the achievement society, I want to prime that with some background information concerning two psychoanalysts and Foucault. All three are contextually important in order to appreciate Hans' notion of an achievement society. For a fantastic breakdown of these two psychoanalysts, watch Adam Curtis's The Century of the Self, who delves into these ideas in a lot more detail. But I will provide a rudimentary overview to contextualize the ideas posited by Han. First, Freud, who I'm sure most of you are all aware of, the father of psychoanalysis. He was the first to posit the idea that beneath the veneer of civilized man, there is a raging unconscious brimming with desires. Freud assumes we are not too distant from our savage forms. We are irrational, violent beings, and it is the job of civilization to suppress this urge within us. This notion of psychoanalysis was monetized by Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, the father of public relations and modern-day advertising. Bernays utilized his uncle's ideas to realize that to get people to buy things, to get the masses to be obedient consumers, one must appeal to that irrational drive within us, the repressed sex, the repressed need for liberation. He utilized Freud's ideas to turn us from civilians to consumers. This went swimmingly with the business elites and power brokers of the early 20th century. This mass consumerism helped pacify large swathes of the masses, reducing the risk of any revolutionary acts. However, Freud's ideas on psychoanalysis were turned on their head by a former student and protege of Freud, a man called Wilhelm Reich. Reich took Freud's ideas and inverted them. Reich realized that it wasn't that man was irrational and society was a civilizing force to acquiesce to our savage nature and reconcile it with civility. No, Reich countered Freud's ideas with his own notion, that man was inherently good, civil, and it was society itself that made us irrational, violent thugs. He posited that the repressions of society, the act of its civilizing that Freud put forward, actually repressed our individuality too much, and we buckled under that repression. Reich believed it was the job of the psychoanalyst to liberate the individual and relieve them of this internal pressure, and in turn this would satiate them into a self-actualized form. The powers that be then used this to their strength. They utilize this age of the individual to feed into our infinite desires and in turn create an empire of individuals, atomized and alone. And in that loneliness, we, the individuals, would be easy to contort and to control. My final contextual individual for understanding Hans' idea on the achievement society is Michel Foucault, the radical French philosopher and likely sex offender. He put forth the idea of the disciplinary power. This is mentioned in a bit more detail soon, but essentially disciplinary power is the power exerted by the elite onto the masses, whereby modern decentralized forms of control regulate individuals by organizing space, time, and human activity to produce docile bodies, operating through constant internalized surveillance exemplified by the panopticon, where individuals self-regulate, shifting power from overt punishment to internalized discipline. It is control without any material sense of control. The omnipresence of control itself shapes individuals to the wishes of the elites that run society. It is done so to maximize the efficiency and economic output of an individual. These three individuals illuminate the extent to which the powers that be can actively utilize developments in psychoanalysis and psychology to exert control over the masses. So keep these three in mind as we analyze Hans' notion of the achievement society. As mentioned previously, Fisher evoked the idea of how, in the oppressive state of the omnipresence of capitalism, with no alternative, we partake in what he calls self-policing. The notion dictates that the locus of control shifts from the state to the individual to control themselves. Byung takes this further and differentiates societies historically as discipline and achievement societies. Discipline societies were the societies of yesteryear, when draconian rules, social conformity, and punitive measures were the norm. These sorts of societies sure had their fair share of mental illnesses and neuroses. Freud's psychoanalytic theories were primed around such societies. However, the mental illnesses that arose from these societies tended to be concerned with hysteria from repression. Think repressing one's own pleasurable inclinations in order to fit in with the stringent society around them. Nowadays, however, we have pivoted towards an achievement society. What we lack in punitive punishment and draconian rules, we make up for in the constraints of unfettered freedom. Essentially, we have pivoted away from should to can. We don't need to follow directives from church or society. Now we are boundless and free to do whatever we may please. And this comes with a whole new paradigm of mental illnesses. With the Can Society, we suffer from what Kierkegaard would define as the dizzying anxiety of freedom. The abundance of choices to make within the free society are taxing on the mind. Think of the disciplined society versus the achievement society as Orwell versus Huxley. The age of abundance in information and choices is oppressive in its variety and relentless unendingness. This in turn means the oppressed feel depressed and not revolutionary. ADHD, depression, and bipolar disorders are the result of being able to do anything. The modern person does not aspire to obedience, law, and obligation, but freedom, pleasure, and inclination. The modern man does not act at the behest of the other, but hearkens mainly to itself. In turn, this atomizes us further and further as we seek to define ourselves as individuated away from the masses, rather than identifying with them. The oppression evoked by the achievement society is entangled in the positive thinking it proclaims to cultivate. Excessive positivity expresses itself as an excess of stimuli, information, and impulses. These change the economy of attention, whereby we are forced to multitask in the achievement society. The excessive multitasking does not represent civilizational others. Multitasking is common among wild animals, which is why animals are incapable of contemplative immersion. Thus we become paralyzed in the demands, in the multitasking. We're unable to commit to an action, revolutionary or not, stuck in a liminal space that hollows us out into a depressed shell of our former self. Byung writes, "The exhausted depressive achievement subject grinds itself down, so to speak. It is tired, exhausted by itself and at war with itself, entirely incapable of stepping outward, of standing outside itself, of relying on the other, on the world. It locks its jaws on itself. Paradoxically, this leads to a hollowing and emptying out. It wears it out in a rat race it runs against itself." Alain Ehrenberg, the French sociologist, expands on this idea in his book The Wariness of the Self. He ultimately describes this depression as one exhausted by their own sovereignty. The achievement society demands so much of us, pulls us in so many directions. It leaves us frozen, catatonic, and within this we withdraw further into ourselves. And this is fundamentally all by design. As both Ehrenberg and Hahn point out, a lack of cohesive community results in a lack of cohesive rigidity. We become easier to contort, manipulate, and control. It's by design that we are bombarded by excessive positivity and calls to do more. This demands the glorification of hustle culture and a comparative society where we inspect and judge each other with a fine-tooth comb results in a depressive state for us all. ADD, hyperactivity, and an inability to commit our attention results in us collectively losing the ability to introspectively analyze our lives and contemplate a shared future. This world, the achievement society we've built for ourselves, becomes above all else tiring. Exhausted by the demands, most people feel spiritually lethargic by mid-afternoon, unable to reignite the voracious human spirit needed for creativity or fun. But this tiredness is unique. As Peter Hank describes, this type of tiredness is an ego-driven tiredness. It is a solitary tiredness, evoking a separating and isolating effect. He calls it the I tiredness, or divisive tiredness. It's a new form of exhaustion, one that is caused by the individual's demand to earn self-worth and acceptance by being more productive, efficient, and remarkable. He differentiates this tiredness from a reconciliatory tiredness, which is one that is communally shared, one that arises after collectively achieving a great feat, for example. Ours, on the other hand, is one we face and suffer alone, often in silence. And how do we remedy this perpetual feeling of tiredness? Well, through indulging in instant gratification. Drugs, alcohol, porn, and fast food. And does any of it work? No. We've become hypodopaminic, a relatively new, pervasive, and endemic illness shared by us all. It used to be strictly for the few unfortunates who have been diagnosed with ADHD, but now we are all ADHD coded. The demands of modern life have caused us to be essentially immune to fun and pleasure. Our neurodopamine receptors have been pulverized by the incessant stimuli of the modern world, and, as Hans states, the late modern achievement subject with a surplus of options at its disposal proves incapable of intensive bonding. We've chosen endless streams of pleasure in feeds dictated to us by billionaires to keep us busy so that we cannot connect beyond the vacuous and meaningless connections afforded by social media. We've become numb. We've become animalistic in our self-imposed captivity. And this system evokes that trauma. As Chris Hedges writes, trauma numbs our capacity to feel. It fractures our self. It disconnects us from our bodies. It keeps us in a state of hyperarousal. It makes us confuse our desires, often artificially implanted by the consumer society, with our needs. Traumatized people view the world around them as hostile and dangerous. They lack a positive image of themselves and lose the capacity to trust. Many replace intimacy and love with sexual sadism, which is how we become a pornified culture. Trauma creates what the psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton calls a counterfeit world, defined by phantom enemies, lies, and dark conspiracies. It negates a sense of purpose and a life of meaning. In our search for connectivity and novelty, we sacrifice meaningful connection, relationships in lieu of depravity and inauthentic lives, just to feel something. And not only that, we self-sabotage our own relationships we're lucky to be in the run away from our own inescapable traumas. Yet we still remain longing for that genuine connectivity and belonging we innately crave as humans. Hedges continues, trauma, Dr. Herman writes, impels people both to withdraw from close relationships and to seek them desperately. It induces feelings of shame, guilt, and inferiority, as well as the need to avoid reminders of the trauma that occurs in daily life. Trauma severely compromises the capacity for intimacy. Trauma can dramatically reduce focus to extremely limited goals, often a matter of hours or days. If trauma entails a disconnection from the self, then it makes sense to say that we are being collectively flooded with influences that both exploit and reinforce trauma. Furthermore, recognized expert on trauma Dr. Mate writes, work pressures, multitasking, social media, news updates, multiplicities of entertainment sources, these all induce us to become lost in thoughts, frantic activities, gadgets, meaningless conversations. We are caught up in pursuits of all kinds that draw us on, not because they are necessary or inspiring or uplifting, or because they enrich or add meaning to our lives, but simply because they obliterate the present. And that present we are running away from, that eternal present lost in the perpetual chase towards an unknown future, or that longing for simpler days of yesteryear, results us being locked in that catatonic liminal space where we are atomized, hyperstimulated, and deeply, deeply miserable. All of this converges in a system designed intentionally to stop us from forming communal bonds and preventing us to find meaningful purpose collectively. In essence, this system they've built is destroying our minds in order to prevent us building together a planet that isn't to their liking, or a future where we, the people, rule hand in hand. This is the first part of a two-part video series. Subscribe to keep up to date for part 2, where I will be expanding on this core notion, looking at thinkers such as Darren Allen, Oliver James, Herbert Marcuse, and of course more Mark Fisher. And after the discord of doom and gloom featured in this video, I'll be wrapping up on a note of radical optimism. So please subscribe below and follow me on my Substack. And until next time, peace.